Hi there, and welcome back to Lean Reads, the channel where we share powerful insights and personal growth lessons through great books. What if the world we know, the world of trade, technology, and abundance, was never natural at all? What if it existed only because one nation decided to hold it together? Peter Zeihan's The End of the World is Just the Beginning asks a haunting question. What happens when America stops protecting the world? If you enjoy what you hear and want to dive deeper, we've included a link to the book in the description below. Now, let's get started. The End of the World is Just the Beginning, 2022, by Peter Zeihan, poses a haunting question. What would happen if the United States abandoned its role as the architect and guarantor of the global order it painstakingly built after World War II? The short and deeply unsettling answer is that the world as we know it would spiral into crisis and perhaps even violence. Yet, the end of the world is just the beginning is far more than a grim prediction. It is an intellectually captivating journey that explores the grand landscape of global politics and economics, from urgent issues like trade and energy to foreign policy and demographics. Zeihan offers sharp, thought-provoking analysis of what might unfold as America retreats from its position as the keystone of the international system. Peter Zeihan is a leading expert in the fields of energy, demography, and international security. Before founding his independent geopolitical consulting firm, he worked with the U.S. State Department and several prestigious think tanks in Washington, D.C. He is also the author of acclaimed works such as The Absent Superpower and Disunited Nations, solidifying his reputation as one of today's foremost geopolitical analysts. Since the end of World War II, the world has experienced a relatively stable and predictable era of social and economic progress. Billions of people have escaped poverty, while the wealthy have grown even richer. Global trade has flourished, fueling an explosion of technology that is faster, cheaper, and more advanced than ever before. Together, these forces have created an unprecedented level of comfort and convenience. We can now order almost anything and have it delivered to our doorstep within days or even hours. However, according to geopolitical strategist Peter Zeihan, this golden age is about to end. He argues that we have grown accustomed to viewing the world solely through an economic lens, through the flow of goods, production chains, and emerging markets. Yet globalization was never a natural or spontaneous process. It was, in fact, the result of a deliberate strategic decision by the United States to shape the world order according to its own ideals and interests. In this book, Zeihan reveals that America's pursuit of globalization was driven by both moral purpose and self-interest. But as those motivations fade, the U.S. is gradually stepping back from its role as global architect and protector. And as Zeihan warns, that is not good news for the rest of the world. Zeihan argues that the familiar world we live in today stands on the brink of collapse. We will soon see why, but first, let's take a closer look at what he means by the world. In other words, how does this world actually function? How is its geopolitical order structured? These are big questions. So let's start with something more tangible. Imagine you're standing in the middle of a medium-sized supermarket. The aisles are packed with goods. The barcode scanners beep rhythmically, and shoppers move briskly in every direction. Now, look toward the back, where a vast storeroom hums with activity, trucks, forklifts, and pallets stacked sky high. Everywhere you look, there's abundance, an almost overwhelming display of plenty. In developed countries today, an average supermarket carries around 40,000 different products. For comparison, at the start of the previous century, that number was only about 200. So, what accounts for this astonishing difference? Take a closer look at the shelves. You'll see Himalayan pink salt, Indonesian tuna, Italian polenta, Japanese miso, Moroccan lemons, and Argentinian merlot. Produce and goods from every corner of the planet, oceans, mountains, and farmlands, have converged here, available year round at affordable prices. This is nothing short of miraculous, considering that for most of human history, roughly 250,000 years, people have lived under the constant shadow of scarcity and high costs. Diversity, stability of supply, and low prices. These are the defining features of globalization. And for the past 70 years, they have shaped the modern world we inhabit. Of course, globalization's influence extends far beyond supermarket aisles. Not only is our food sourced globally, but nearly everything else in our daily lives is too. Smartphones, fertilizers, diesel fuel, single malt whiskey, virtually every product we buy, use, or consume is made or assembled from components that originate across the globe. If we think of goods as the blood cells of the global system, then the transportation network, especially maritime shipping, is its circulatory system. Massive cargo ships loaded with raw materials like Cambodian rice or Ukrainian grain embody the scale of globalization. Even more impressive are the container ships that transport roughly 90% of the world's manufactured goods. Everything from laptops and televisions to automobiles and cadmium batteries. Transoceanic shipping is the engine that drives global trade, the locomotive pulling the entire machinery of globalization. However, as Zeihan makes clear in the chapters to come, the creation and maintenance of this global transport system were not natural developments. They were the result of deliberate design, and that design is now beginning to unravel. The concept of global trade, as we understand it today, did not truly exist before 1945. Yes, there was lively maritime commerce, but the flow of goods was far from global. Instead, it operated primarily within the boundaries of empires. Consider the British Empire from around 1880 up to World War II. Tea from India, sugar from Jamaica, tools from England, and wool from Australia were shipped across vast distances, yet all of it moved on British ships, between British ports, within a closed imperial network of production and consumption. Other empires, French, Russian, Japanese, Ottoman, operated in much the same way. But this system carried immense risk, dependence on other empires for food, industrial components, or export markets made any nation vulnerable whenever diplomatic relations soured. In an age of fierce imperial competition, rivals constantly sought to exploit such weaknesses. Conflict was inevitable in a world where every power viewed the others as potential enemies. The expansion of one empire meant seizing territory from another. War became unavoidable, and its scale and brutality only intensified with time. By the 1930s, Nazi Germany believed the only path to power was through the conquest of all Europe. Britain, France, the Soviet Union, even the Netherlands. The struggle for total control over resources led directly to total war. By 1945, Europe lay in ruins, and capitalism itself teetered on the edge of collapse. The Soviet Red Army had seized control of half the continent and seemed poised to take the rest. In that moment, the United States, the only major capitalist power left standing, decided to intervene. But instead of restoring the old imperial order, Washington convened a series of meetings in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design an entirely new world system, one built around free trade under what became known as the Bretton Woods system. Participating nations agreed to dismantle their imperial trade blocs and open their markets to one another. In return, the United States guaranteed global security. The U.S. Navy patrolled the world's oceans, safeguarding international shipping routes. American diplomats pressed countries to lower tariffs and remove protectionist barriers, creating a level playing field where every participant could access global markets and financial systems, including America's own. To join the Bretton Woods system, nations had to meet two conditions: adopt an anti Soviet stance, genuine or symbolic, allow a degree of U.S. influence over their foreign policy. The system worked remarkably well. Almost every major nation joined, including former Axis powers like Germany and Japan, old allies such as Britain and France, resource rich developing states like Saudi Arabia and Iran, and strategically located countries such as Iceland, Norway, and Turkey, which controlled key maritime choke points, preventing Soviet fleets from entering the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. By the 1970s, even China had become part of the system. The scale and reach of Bretton Woods were extraordinary, and many analysts credit it as one of the main reasons the Soviet Union eventually weakened and collapsed. The system's primary goal was economic, but its foundation was strategic. America needed Bretton Woods to win the Cold War, yet it came with enormous costs and complications. Global leadership required massive expenditures and constant management, and free trade did not always benefit everyone equally. The United States wanted industrial powers like Germany and Japan firmly in its camp, so it helped rebuild them after the war. But bringing China into the fold fractured the communist bloc and reshaped global politics. Meanwhile, the rise of foreign competitors, cars from Germany, electronics from Japan, and steel from China, hit U.S. manufacturing hard, turning many once prosperous industrial hubs into Rust Belt regions of decline. Still, as long as the Soviet Union existed, the U.S. continued to uphold the Bretton Woods Order, and as long as America remained the global hegemon, world trade thrived. The stability and security provided by the United States underpinned the global economy. Take maritime shipping, for instance. Because the U.S. Navy kept the world's sea lanes safe, ships could afford to move more slowly, allowing for the construction of larger, heavier, and more efficient vessels. Modern container ships are now roughly 16 times larger than those of 1945, yet the cost of transporting each unit of cargo is about 4 times cheaper. This dramatic improvement in efficiency is one of the key reasons we enjoy today's incredible diversity and abundance of goods on supermarket shelves. Free trade, the cornerstone of the Bretton Woods Agreement, was the engine that powered globalization, yet its true purpose was never simply about economic liberalization. It functioned more like a grand bargain, an implicit offer the United States extended to its allies. Help us contain the Soviet Union, and in return, you'll gain access to the most dynamic economic system in the world. America won the Cold War, but at the cost of industrial decline and the loss of millions of manufacturing jobs at home. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union served as a unifying threat, one powerful enough to justify the sacrifices required to maintain the global order. But after the USSR collapsed, convincing the American public to keep investing in that system became far more difficult. Free trade had once been vital because it served U.S. national security interests. But was that still true after 1989? For roughly 2 decades after the Cold War, the answer appeared to be yes. The United States maintained the status quo. To understand why, we need to shift our focus from global trade in general to one specific commodity: oil. Oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization. Oil is indispensable to modern life. It fuels factories, transportation, and energy grids. It exists in almost everything around us, from roofing materials and smartphones to shoes, plastics, and even teaspoons. Without oil, the world as we know it would grind to a halt. But alongside its benefits come profound challenges. The mass combustion of oil contributes to environmental catastrophe, while its transportation across the globe poses logistical and geopolitical risks. The issue isn't technological or logistical, it's geopolitical. Nearly every oil field on Earth is technically exploitable with enough capital investment. Take the Kashagan field in Kazakhstan, located 2 miles beneath the Caspian Sea, battered by freezing winds and thick ice. It required an estimated 150 billion in upfront costs to develop. And yet, for energy-dependent industrial economies like Japan, such sources are essential. Oil from Kashagan must travel through 1,000 miles of pipeline and another 8,000 miles by tanker before reaching the consumer. Because of its central role, the oil market is extraordinarily sensitive. The flow of oil must remain uninterrupted. Any disruption can trigger chaos across the global economy. Even a seemingly minor incident can ripple through financial systems. The fragility of oil security. A vivid example came during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, when two of the world's top oil producers clashed. Though neither side halted production, their military stalemate pushed both to begin attacking oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Only 12 tankers were sunk, a negligible figure compared to global supply. But the psychological impact was devastating. Insurance companies had never priced in the risk of wartime attacks on international shipping. As the claims mounted, major insurers and reinsurers teetered on the edge of collapse, threatening to trigger a global financial meltdown comparable to the 2008 crisis. The United States stepped in by escorting non-Iranian tankers through the Persian Gulf and stabilizing insurance markets. Washington prevented a full-blown disaster. This episode revealed not only the fragility of the oil market, but also America's indispensable role in sustaining its stability. Guaranteeing the continuous flow of oil became a long-term U.S. commitment, one that demanded a constant military presence in the Middle East and the protection of key global sea lanes. America's costly commitment to the Middle East. In the decades after the Cold War, the U.S. intervened repeatedly in the Middle East to secure oil supplies. It launched the first Gulf War to force Iraq out of Kuwait and restore its oil production. It also waged a long campaign against Osama bin Laden's Islamist networks, which threatened to topple Saudi Arabia, America's most critical ally and the world's largest oil producer. These wars cost the U.S. trillions of dollars and claimed thousands of American lives. Yet Washington continued to pay the price until its energy policy began to change. The rise of U.S. energy independence. The turning point came with America's march toward energy independence. Thanks to breakthroughs in shale oil extraction, the U.S. dramatically reduced its reliance on Middle Eastern imports. This newfound autonomy weakened the strategic logic behind endless intervention in the region's conflicts. Former President Donald Trump famously called the Middle East conflicts the stupid wars. His remark captured a profound shift in U.S. foreign policy thinking. America no longer saw maintaining oil flows from the Middle East as a vital national interest. For nations still dependent on that oil, however, this is an alarming development. As the U.S. retreats from its role as the world's global policeman, the Middle East may face increasing instability without the security umbrella that once kept it in check. There is a fundamental reason why the United States maintained a powerful global military and political presence after the Cold War to ensure a steady, high quality, and low cost supply of oil from the Middle East. According to Zeihan, however, that era is now drawing to a close. Several factors have driven this change: shifting demographics, declining public faith in globalization, and widespread resentment among middle class Americans who blame globalization for job losses and industrial decline. While many of these trends are complex, one stands out above the rest: America's rise as an energy superpower. The rise of an energy independent America. Today, the United States is one of the world's top oil producers, pumping roughly 4 million barrels per day, comparable to Iran's peak production in the 1970s. Although the U.S. remains a massive consumer of oil, once the largest importer on Earth, it has now become a net exporter. This turning point came through the shale oil revolution. To grasp its full impact, we must look back. Between 1998 and 2008, oil prices soared from around $10 per barrel to over 150. This surge had two profound effects. Imported oil became prohibitively expensive. Energy companies gained strong incentives to find and extract new domestic sources. Traditional oil extraction only works efficiently when large centralized fields are available. Countless smaller, scattered deposits existed, but were long ignored due to high costs and inefficiency. Shale oil changed that equation. Like conventional drilling, fracking begins vertically, but once the drill reaches an oil-bearing shale layer, it turns horizontally, boring through the rock. A high-pressure mixture of water and sand is then injected to create fractures, allowing oil to flow out of previously inaccessible pockets. The sand keeps the cracks open, and once the water is pumped back to the surface, oil continues to flow freely. Each American shale well rivals the output of wells in Saudi Arabia or Iraq. Collectively, shale wells produce around 10 million barrels per day. Combined with conventional production, this has propelled the U.S. to become the largest oil producer in the world, achieving true energy independence. The geopolitical consequences. This reality has profoundly altered America's strategic calculus. For the first time since 1945, the U.S. no longer has a strategic need to maintain a global free trade order. Some Americans still argue that the U.S. should shoulder that burden out of moral responsibility, but such arguments have lost their resonance. In the past, moral purpose and self-interest were intertwined. Today, the public is far more aware of the costs of maintaining the global system. As a result, isolationism, the belief that America should prioritize its own interests and let others manage their own problems, has gained renewed traction. If America steps back, so what happens if the United States truly turns inward? The consequences for the global oil market could be catastrophic. If simmering tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia were to erupt into open war, roughly 27 million barrels of oil per day could vanish from the global market. If Egypt descended into political chaos and the Suez Canal were closed, another 5 million barrels per day would disappear. Outside of the United States, only 4 nations possess militaries capable of intervening in the Middle East: France, the United Kingdom, Japan, and China. Yet only Japan has the logistical and technical capacity to mount large-scale operations. In other words, without America's security umbrella, the rest of the world would be dangerously exposed to energy shocks. The scale of global vulnerability. Consider the world's major manufacturing economies. China imports about 70% of its 14 million barrels per day consumption. Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, though smaller consumers, 1 to 4 million barrels per day each, import over 95% of their oil. A severe oil disruption would cripple East Asia's entire industrial system. Worse still, it would paralyze global shipping. Modern container vessels don't simply ferry goods between two ports. They operate as part of vast, interconnected networks, stopping at multiple destinations to load and unload components for global supply chains. When one link in this chain breaks, the entire system begins to falter. As the automotive industry often puts it, it takes 30,000 parts to build a car, but if one is missing, all you have is a very expensive pile of scrap metal. The looming collapse. This, Zeihan warns, is the grim future the world could face. If the United States abandons its global security commitments, the entire economic and political order may begin to unravel. Globalization, once powered by America's protection and stability, could give way to a new age of scarcity, fragmentation, and conflict. Globalization, the integration of economies and cultures across the world, was never a spontaneous phenomenon. It was driven by the strategic calculations of the United States during the Cold War. To contain Soviet influence, America actively promoted global trade as a form of geopolitical incentive, a bribe, in Zeihan's words, offering its allies access to U.S. markets and protection in exchange for loyalty within a U.S. led world order. Beyond geopolitical motives, America's dependence on foreign oil was another major force behind globalization. The need for abundant external energy pushed the U.S. to engage deeply with international markets, championing free trade and the global flow of goods and services. However, after 1989, the world's geopolitical and energy landscape changed profoundly. The collapse of the Soviet Union removed the primary threat that had justified America's global leadership. At the same time, the shale oil revolution brought the U.S. closer to energy independence, reducing its reliance on foreign supply. With these two foundational incentives gone, the Cold War imperative and energy dependence, the strategic logic behind America's global engagement has faded. The United States no longer has the same motivation to act as the world's policeman, bearing the cost of maintaining international order and free trade for all. In this new era, America's retreat may usher in unpredictable consequences for globalization, other nations will have to adapt and recalibrate to survive in a world where old guarantees no longer hold. The journey ahead promises to be turbulent and uncertain, demanding preparation, resilience, and adaptability from every corner of the global system. Reading Peter Zeihan says, "The end of the world is just the beginning," feels like standing on a high ridge looking back at a world we thought we understood and realizing it was all built on fragile scaffolding. Zeihan doesn't just describe globalization, he dissects it. He shows us that what we've long considered a natural evolution of markets and technology was, in fact, a deliberate construct, a global order shaped, protected, and subsidized by American power. For decades, we lived in a golden illusion of abundance, cheap energy, stable trade, and peace at scale. But behind that comfort was an unspoken pact, one that is now quietly dissolving. As I turned each chapter, the book felt less like a geopolitical analysis and more like a post-mortem on the world we grew up in. Zeihan's message is clear and unsettling. The era of effortless interconnection is ending. Without America's guarantee of open seas and secure trade, the intricate machinery of globalization begins to break down, from energy markets to supply chains, from finance to food. What struck me most was Zeihan's cold clarity. He doesn't dramatize or moralize. He simply connects the dots: geography, demographics, technology, and politics into a picture that feels both terrifying and inevitable. His writing reminds us that prosperity is not permanent and that modern civilization depends on invisible systems more fragile than we care to admit. Yet amid the pessimism, there's also a strange sense of honesty, even liberation. If globalization truly ends, perhaps the world will rediscover resilience on a smaller, more local scale. Nations will be forced to reinvent themselves, and individuals will have to rethink what security and progress mean in a fragmented future. When I finished the book, I felt both humbled and awakened. Zeihan challenges us to stop taking the modern world for granted, to see the geopolitical tides beneath the surface of our daily lives. It is a sobering reminder that history never ends. It merely pauses between waves.